Have you ever felt too small to face a huge problem? Like the world placed a massive weight on your shoulders and all you had in your hands were clay jars? Yeah, sometimes life's greatest battles aren't won with brute force, but with faith, courage, and a solid dose of divine strategy. In today's video, you're going to discover how an ordinary man who, by the way, was quite fearful managed to free an entire nation without lifting a single sword. Gideon's story is going to surprise you. And no, this isn't just about religion, it's about bold decisions, unexpected reactions, and how God's power can turn a simple farmer into the hero of a people. Get ready to understand why. Among an army of tens of thousands, only 300 men were chosen. And more than that, why they didn't use spears, but trumpets, torches, and clay jars to defeat their enemies. Sounds crazy? Hold on, every detail of this insane plan holds a practical lesson for anyone facing invisible battles. So if you've ever been doubted, underestimated, or even rejected, this story will speak straight to your heart. Because when the angel of the Lord knocks at your door, it doesn't matter how big the enemy army is. What really counts is how much faith you carry inside your heart. Gideon didn't start his journey as a hero, far from it. He was just a farmer, hiding inside a wine press, threshing wheat in secret so the Midianites wouldn't steal it all. Fear was part of his daily routine, and a sense of helplessness consumed the people of Israel. No one looked to him for leadership. He was the kind of man who preferred anonymity over responsibility. But that's where the story gets interesting. God tends to choose the unlikely. And on one of those ordinary, sweaty days of hiding, the unexpected happened. An angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon and, without hesitation, called him a mighty warrior. Imagine the shock. A scared guy being called to lead a war against the feared Midianites. That's like picking a pizza delivery guy to command an army. But God doesn't see what human eyes see. He sees hidden potential, even the kind we don't believe we have. The most beautiful part is that God didn't demand an impressive resume or unwavering faith right from the start. On the contrary, he began with a simple invitation that spoke straight to the heart. Go in the strength you have. Gideon tried to argue, saying he was the least in the weakest family of Israel, and who hasn't made similar excuses. But God didn't back down. The divine call had already been made, and when God calls, he also equips. This beginning teaches us a powerful truth. It's not the external circumstances that define your role, it's your response when life, or God, calls you. Gideon was buried in fear, but that encounter changed everything. From that point on, the hidden farmer began his personal transformation into a leader not by merit, but by grace and the power of God. And believe me, this can happen to you too, even if everything around you says otherwise. Gideon heard the call, but he still had doubts. And who could blame him? When you've lived in fear for too long, it's hard to believe something great can come out of your story. So he asked for a sign, and it wasn't a small one. He prepared an offering with meat and unleavened bread and placed it on a rock right in front of the angel of the Lord. A bold move for someone who, not long before, just wanted to stay hidden from the Midianites. God's answer was astonishing. The angel touched the offering with his staff, and fire flared from the rock and consumed everything. No matches, no tricks. It was the supernatural confirming that the mission wasn't just in Gideon's head. It was real, powerful, and impossible to ignore. That's when he realized he was dealing with something far bigger than he could control. That moment of fire is symbolic. It's not just about a burnt offering, it's about confirmation. It's the turning point where fear starts giving way to faith. And believe me, everyone who receives a divine calling will, at some point, ask for confirmation. And that's okay. The important thing is to stay open to listening and watching for the signs. They might not come as literal fire, but they'll show up in open doors, words that hit deep, and circumstances that change out of nowhere. After this encounter, Gideon was shaken. He even thought he was going to die for having seen the angel of the Lord face to face. That's how intense the fear and reverence were. But God reassured him, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. You will not die." And that's how true callings work. They come with a sense of awe, but also with peace. A peace that doesn't erase the challenge, but gives strength to face it. And for Gideon, the journey was just beginning. Now that Gideon had received divine confirmation, it was time to act, and the first mission was anything but easy. God asked him to destroy the altar of Baal, which belonged to his own family. Just imagine the tension. Challenging idolatry was already risky. Doing it to a local altar tied to the people's traditions was like poking a bear. On top of that, Gideon had to face the fear of disappointing his father and enraging the community. Even afraid, he obeyed. But he did it at night, in secret, with 10 of his servants. In other words, courage was there, but so was fear. And that's okay. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action while trembling. Gideon tore down Baal's altar, cut down the Asherah pole beside it, and built a new altar to the Lord in its place. A gesture that may seem symbolic, but was actually revolutionary. It marked the break with idolatry and the beginning of spiritual restoration in Israel. The people's reaction was exactly what you'd expect: outrage. When they found out who did it, they wanted Gideon dead. But to everyone's surprise, his own father defended him, saying if Baal is really a god, let him defend himself. It was a simple yet powerful argument, and it worked. That's when the nickname Jerubbaal was born, the one who contends with Baal. And just like that, Gideon gained the respect of many who didn't even know his name before. That moment was a turning point. Destroying Baal's altar wasn't just smashing stones, it was breaking a system, confronting rotten traditions, and paving the way for Israel's deliverance. And the same applies today. Sometimes, before we defeat an external army, we need to face our internal idols, those habits, addictions, or fears we've raised like gods. And the only way to deal with them is to tear them down, even if it hurts, even if it costs, even if it scares us. Then came the most absurd part, at least in human terms of this story. Gideon managed to gather an army of 32,000 men. Not bad, considering how much fear was gripping Israel. But then God said something completely unexpected. There are too many. Too many? Against the Midianites, who were as numerous as locusts. Exactly. God wanted to make it clear that the victory wouldn't come from human strength, but from his own power. First, God told Gideon to let anyone who was afraid go home. 22,000 left. Only 10,000 remained. It already seemed small, but God said it was still too many. So came the second filter: take the men to the water and watch how they drank. Those who knelt and dipped their faces were dismissed. Only 300 who brought water to their mouths with their hands were chosen. A strange selection, but one that spoke volumes about vigilance and readiness. Imagine the weight of that. Gideon, already insecure by nature, was now left with just 300 men. There was no military logic to it. It was like facing a tank with a wooden spoon. But that was the point: to remove any rational explanation. Because sometimes God needs to strip away everything that feels safe to show us that he alone is enough. And when we truly grasp that, fear turns into bold faith. This part of the story challenges us to look at life's reductions differently. Losing isn't always failure. Sometimes it's God clearing the stage to reveal his hand more clearly. Gideon's army was trimmed to the bone, but in that scarcity, the greatest divine strategy Israel had ever seen was born. And let's face it, when you're down to 300 men against thousands, there's no room for doubt. It's either a miracle or miracle. With only 300 men by his side, Gideon received a strategy from God that, by human standards, sounded like a bad joke. Instead of swords or spears, each soldier was given a trumpet, a burning torch hidden inside a clay jar, and the command to wait for the signal. No traditional weapons, no frontal attack, just instruments, light, and sound. It was as if God were saying, victory won't come by might, but by obedience to my direction. At the appointed time, divided into 3 groups, the 300 surrounded the enemy camp. At Gideon's signal, they smashed the jars, revealed the torches, blew the trumpets, and shouted, "For the Lord and for Gideon." The noise, the sudden light, and the shock caused absolute panic among the Midianites. In total confusion, they began to fight each other, thinking they were under attack by a massive army. It was such chaos that the victory came without the Israelites even drawing a sword. This scene is a masterclass in how God works through the unlikely. Who would expect trumpets and torchlight to bring down a mighty army? But that's where the beauty of divine strategy lies. God doesn't follow human formulas. He acts in ways that make it crystal clear the glory is His. And this victory didn't just save Israel, it left a deep mark on the people. It was living proof that when God is in charge, even the simplest tools become powerful weapons. Think about that in your own life. Sometimes we expect a sword, but God hands us a trumpet. We want a detailed battle plan, and He gives us a torch and shout of faith. It's not about the tools, it's about trust. The secret is in obeying, even when the plan sounds odd. Because, in the end, the clay jar might seem fragile, but when it breaks at the right moment, it reveals a light that sends your enemies running. The initial victory didn't mark the end of Gideon's mission. After the chaos in the Midianite camp, the survivors fled in desperation. But Gideon wasn't content with just scattering them. He wanted complete justice. So he pursued the kings Zebah and Zalmunna, the main leaders behind Israel's oppression. It was a determined chase that showed real deliverance demands perseverance to the end, not just partial wins. During this pursuit, Gideon faced something unexpected: rejection from his own people. The towns of Sukkot and Peniel refused to provide food for his men, doubting that he would capture the enemy kings. That hurt, but it didn't stop him. He pressed on, captured both Midianite leaders, and when he returned, he severely punished those who had refused to support his mission. It was a hard lesson, but a real one. Not everyone will walk with you to the end, and sometimes betrayal comes from those you least expect. This part of the story reveals a stronger, more assertive side of Gideon. The man who once hid in the winepress was now boldly walking among his enemies. He was no longer driven by fear, but by the certainty of a mission completed with courage. He knew that in times of spiritual warfare, disloyalty couldn't be tolerated. Leadership demands tough decisions, and Gideon was ready to make them. His personal transformation was now complete, shaped by both faith and struggle. However, that same intensity which had made him a liberator could also become a trap. Because when victory goes to your head, it's easy to confuse justice with vengeance and leadership with control. Gideon was still admired, but the seeds of something dangerous were already being planted. And that's when we realize even those chosen by God need constant vigilance not to fall into their own excesses. His journey was far from over. After the great victory, the people of Israel were so amazed by Gideon that they offered him the throne. They wanted him to become their king, and for his sons and grandsons to rule after him. After all, it's not every day someone defeats an army with 300 men, trumpets, and torches. But Gideon, in an act of humility, turned them down. He said clearly, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over Israel." It was a beautiful answer that showed he understood God's sovereignty. But despite refusing the crown, Gideon made a decision that brought serious consequences. He asked the Israelites to give him the gold earrings they had taken as plunder from the war, and with them, he created an ephod, a priestly garment, symbol of spiritual direction. The intention may have seemed good, but the object quickly became a focus of idolatry. The people began to worship the ephod, drifting away from God. What started as an act of gratitude became a spiritual trap. That moment marks a turning point. Gideon wanted to honor God, but he ended up creating something that unintentionally diverted the people's faith. It's a powerful warning: not all mistakes come from outright rebellion. Sometimes they're born from good intentions that lack proper guidance. We build our own ephods, symbols, methods, or achievements that quietly take God's place in our lives. And even when it looks harmless, that's still idolatry in disguise. Still, Gideon remained respected and admired. He lived in peace, had many children, and left behind an impressive legacy. But that one small mistake, creating the ephod, planted a seed of spiritual drift that would grow strong in the next generation. And that leads us to reflect as we try to honor God. Are we also building personal altars? The line between reverence and vanity may be thinner than we think. After Gideon's death, everything changed. The people who had experienced freedom and peace quickly fell back into idolatry. And at the center of this new crisis was Abimelech, one of Gideon's sons, born from a concubine. Driven by ambition and hunger for power, he decided he wanted to be king, something his father had firmly refused. And to get the throne, he didn't hesitate to stain his hands with blood. Abimelech killed 70 of his brothers, all sons of Gideon, to eliminate any threat to his claim. It was a calculated massacre, an act of sheer vanity and selfishness. He then took the throne in Shechem, but his reign began in blood. Rather than being a just leader, he became a tyrant. His alliance with corrupt men and his authoritarian rule showed what happens when someone seeks authority without a character shaped by God. But power built on blood doesn't last. Abimelech ruled for a while, but his downfall was just as brutal as his rise. During a military campaign, a woman dropped a millstone on his head. Mortally wounded, he begged his armor-bearer to kill him so people wouldn't say he died by a woman's hand. Even his final act was marked by pride and vanity. It's the kind of story that screams a legacy isn't built by mighty acts alone, but by humility and faithfulness. Abimelech's tragedy leaves behind a harsh but necessary lesson. Gideon was a man of faith and courage, but even the greatest heroes in the Bible leave cracks when they neglect the spiritual heritage they build. The ephod, favoritism, and lack of guidance for his children, all of it contributed to a dark future. It makes us ask ourselves, what kind of legacy are we leaving behind? What we plant today, others will harvest tomorrow. Gideon's story is a true spiritual mirror for all of us. An ordinary man, marked by fear, was transformed by God's power into an instrument of deliverance. But his journey wasn't filled with easy victories. It was marked by trials, painful sacrifices, bold decisions, and mistakes that echoed for generations. And maybe the most important question is, what will you do with all of this? Are you still hiding, like Gideon at the start, waiting for the perfect moment to act, while ignoring the voice that's already calling you? Or maybe you're in a reduction phase, losing support and certainty, not realizing that God is shaping a stage where only faith will sustain you. Or perhaps you've built your own ephod, turning past victories into silent idols that distract you from what truly matters. The truth is, we all face battles both internal and external. But just like Gideon, we're invited to trust divine strategies, even when everything seems illogical. Because when we let go of control and choose obedience, the unlikely becomes possible and the impossible just another detail in God's plan. If this message touched your heart in any way, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll keep receiving content that feeds your faith, challenges your spirit, and inspires you to live with purpose. And remember, when God calls you, it doesn't matter how big the enemy is. What matters is how much of yourself you're willing to give.